Welcome. This is a special edition of the McLean Chronicles, the Nazi edition. There's a Nazi in our house. And unfortunately, I think there's more than one Nazi in our house. I'm here to talk to you today about the problems we're having in Canada with our government, with the recent addition of inviting an actual Waffen SS Nazi into the House to be recognized in front of Zelensky, the head of the Ukraine, when he comes over here begging for money and taking our money. Now, it is absolutely, in my humble opinion, zero coincidence that he was found, brought, and put there in the House, and that this was known most of all by Chrystia Freeland, our Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, also known to Justin Trudeau. Make no doubt about it. This was a special nod to be given to Zelensky. More than a nod, an introduction of this Waffen SS Nazi to stand up, fist pump in the House, and have Zelensky smile back at him and give him the fist pump back in a salute. Meanwhile, in the background, Chrystia Freeland is grinning like a Cheshire cat and applauding as hard as she can. Why? She's basically lived her whole life over the problems that Ukraine has had since the war. She goes back, her background and apparent sympathy towards the Nazi culture, the Azov battalions, Stephen Bandera, back in the Ukraine. If she doesn't just enjoy them, she at least works with them as the enemy of my enemy is my friend, because she wants to use her position and our money to settle her own personal ethnic battles back in the Ukraine. And how is this done? By bringing a Nazi into the House. You know, you'll see with politics many times, you'll see this in the U.S., those who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. They'll wear certain scarves or little markers that when they're in the House making a speech, that to the average person, they don't know what it means. They look at it, oh, they're just wearing a scarf. But no, it sends a symbol as to who you really support when you stand in government and you speak with the strength of the government. But we've got a real problem here in Canada. Our Prime Minister is taking part in this. Our Prime Minister, who has been described since this has happened by a former Liberal as a person with a megalomaniac, narcissistic personality. I've got some real problems with the way that Justin Trudeau mimics his government, his communications mimic the way that Hitler came and held on to power. You know, for those, I so much feel for those people who are young, who don't really understand the depravity and the problems and how World War II took place, the mass extermination and murder of people. The stories are just horrific that went on, particularly with the Waffen SS Nazis that we had invited into this House. Now Trudeau, when he does his work, he mimics much of the work that Hitler did. Hitler famously had the Reichstag. It was a fire that he blamed on other people, and then he introduced sort of their own version of the War Measures Act and went clamping down on people, much as Trudeau did here with the Freedom Convoy. You know, Hitler believed very much that the crowd, he believed that the masses were considered, to his mind, feminine, that they were like women, the masses, and that he would tailor his messages to appeal to women's feelings rather than speaking about issues of pragmatic work. And he was right. When he did that, Hitler rose to power doing it that way. And the crazy thing about Canadian politics are we look at who is still supporting Justin Trudeau. Well, his biggest group of supporters are women. It's unbelievable. But it's just the way that it mimics. You know, Hitler used to have a special deal where he'd make sure his photographer was there to take pictures of him with young children. So they would look like, oh, look at Hitler loves the young children. Yet Hitler was massacring young children all across Europe while he was doing his work. But the propaganda worked. It just absolutely worked. You know, one of the things that led with Hitler was the Goebbels statement about when you have a big lie, you just tell the lie. Tell it over and over again and tell it louder and louder, and the people will believe it. Well, one of Trudeau's former MPs was caught speaking on tape saying the same thing. That's their communication style. You know, there was the OSS in the States back then, before there was the secret or the CIA. They did an analysis on Hitler, and one of the things they found is he would never apologize for anything, never claim responsibility for anything that went wrong, just never do it. It's always someone else to blame, but the leader never apologizes. Well, that sounds very much like Justin Trudeau, who, when the public found out about the Nazi in the house, raised ire. And Trudeau came out days later, I think it was 5 days later, to offer up an apology. It wasn't an apology, though. It was a very, very carefully crafted little speech that he was off learning his lines, where he essentially blamed Canadians for the Nazi in the house. He said, "I want to apologize on behalf of all Canadians." Well, no, the Canadians did not invite a Nazi into the house, Mr. Prime Minister. They did not. Your government did. You know, to me, it is just so disturbing, the parallels between this government and the way that Hitler kept on going. You know, one of the things that Hitler did before he got everybody really angry at the Jews so he could kill them, he started talking about people being unclean and places being unclean and people being like vermin and those sort of things, much the way Justin Trudeau messaged about those who didn't take the vaccine mandate, which is another thing that mirrors Hitler's government when they perform medical treatments on and experiments on prisoners, Jews, children, men, women, carving them up to learn things. Out of that came the rules about that you're not allowed to, as a government, force people to do things like take vaccines and a mandate. They called it the Nuremberg trials. Well, we just threw that all out the window in Canada. Another thing with the Nuremberg trials, just by the way, was they found the Waffen SS troops guilty of war crimes, guilty of murdering Canadian prisoners of war. They would take them out, shoot them in the back of the head, or take them out of the prison camps and beat them to death. They were found guilty of that. That's who they brought into our house to stand and applaud. And to my mind, I can't think of anything much sicker than that. Maybe the sicker thing is then lying about it afterwards to the public, calling it an error on behalf of the Canadian people and not owning it. But then again, that's what Hitler would do. He wouldn't own it. It would be someone else's problem. Well, I was called to give an interview with Mark Petroni, the great talk show host for Saga 960 out in Mississauga here in the GTA. Great talk show host, storied history and being a host and doing journalism. And we talked about this problem of the Nazi in the house. I find it really disturbing, as I say, the parallels that are going on and the lack of doing any oversight on this. I mean, so far, just in the last week or two, this Prime Minister has caused a complete disruption in the relationship with India. Why? Over a Khalistani terrorist that he wanted to support with Jagmeet Singh, who is very sympathetic to the Khalistani movement and the terrorism that is there. He threw him a bone. Once again, terrorism, horrible things that our government is being associated with by a Prime Minister who really shouldn't be holding office right now, except for this kind of deal he has with Jagmeet Singh to keep in power. In any event, here is my interview with Mark Petrone. I hope you garner something from it. And I hope you pay more attention to what is going on with our country, as even just since we did this interview, the government is now putting out notice that it wants to start monitoring, and all podcasts and live streamers have to register with the government so the government can decide if what they're saying is okay. We are going down a very, very bad road here that those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. So here we are. Here is the interview.
We are back with more on News Talk Saga 960. So very glad you could join us on this Thursday edition of the Mark Petronis Show. We have Ross McLean joining us from the GTA. He's a security expert and a terrific contributor to this show. I really appreciate having Ross on the show. Welcome, sir.
Good to be with you, Mark, and good to be with all the great listeners.
Okay, in the aftermath of this Nazi scandal in the House of Commons, Justin Trudeau went on the attack. Let's listen.
The Speaker of the House of Commons, Mr. Speaker. It is well established that the independence of the Speaker is sacrosanct. Now, if the Leader of the Opposition wants to change that, let him stand up and say that, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to defend the principles and the rights of parliamentarians, even as we stand with Ukraine against the illegal invasion by Russia. Hear, hear.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Actually, the Speaker's Parliamentary Protective Service reports to the RCMP, which reports to the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister says that his National Police Agency did not vet.
Order. I can't hear the question, so I want to be able to hear the question. I want to be able to hear the answer, of course, as well. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition. Maybe back up and start again.
RCMP reports to the Public Safety Minister, who reports to the Prime Minister. And that Prime Minister is now saying that when he has foreign heads of state here, that terrorists, assassins, convicted murderers would all be allowed to just walk right into the building and be present within mere feet of a potential assassination target. How does he ever expect another head of state to come back to this place?
Which is a good question, Ross. Now, you have experience providing protection for VIPs. What do you make of that exchange?
Yeah, my background, Mark, I have experience in the public sector and in the private sector, protecting royalty, heads of state, ambassadors, prime ministers, visiting heads of state. And in fact, recently, privately, we hosted one of the top heads of state from one country that had a lot of potential for protests going on against the person and this sort of very high head of state. And I worked with the RCMP. I worked with the international security people for this person. And let me tell you, you do not have an event like what went on in the House of Commons without everybody being vetted. Everybody. I even vet lesser events here, and I find people who, even one of them is a Nazi associated person with a background. I won't go into who their name is and this sort of thing. And what they do is they try to come to some events to sit there so they can smear the event. And you work very hard to look at who's in there. Nobody got into that house. Nobody got into that house without being cleared, vetted, without the PMO's office knowing exactly why they're there. Now, forget getting into the house. Imagine being the person asked to stand up and be recognized to that head of state and the prime minister, and to be praised to the prime minister and this head of state. The PMO's office knows exactly who that was. I have no doubt in my mind. It's not being investigated, it's being glossed over. I think it's because it's going to expose a real security risk. You look at who, and I tweeted on this, the one person in that house who exactly knew who this person was, in my opinion, would have been Chrystia Freeland, who is way up past her neck and in over her head with all of the there's no polite way of saying it, the Nazi associations that are going on and that she's been involved with herself. There's just no doubt that they knew who this person was. So to call it as Trudeau called it, an error. No, an error is when your young kid playing shortstop lets the ball go between his legs in a game. That's an error. This was an absolute disgrace, bringing in a Nazi Waffen SS. And I could go on a bit about that. I have researched them, who are the worst of the worst of the worst into our house. And I'll just say this one last part, Mark, then I'll put it back over to you. Um, Leslin Lewis tweeted about a 101-year-old Canadian veteran who died, who fought in World War II the day after this happened. I certainly hope that he did not see this before he passed, that the man who fought this war sees a Nazi Waffen SS being celebrated, and you cannot convince me otherwise, or you show me the evidence how Trudeau and Freeland didn't know exactly who this man is. I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt.
So Anthony wrote a total scapegoat, and the Liberals are desperate for this thing to just go away. But I'm just not sure that I'm ready to let it go, and others too. I mean, you don't want to beat a dead horse. However, if they're hiding something, and to Poilievre's point, it doesn't look like these people are getting ready to make any changes, because that would, of course, be like admitting that they did something wrong. And so they're going to just pretend it's all on Anthony Rota. And Rota did not admit to inviting this guy, despite Justin Trudeau saying that he did. And so that's a nagging problem. And some of the research that I've seen by people like Andy Lee and others suggest that it was Chrystia Freeland. Given all her background, and you've spoken about this, with her grandfather's association with Nazis, it must be very uncomfortable for her right now listening to all this stuff, knowing the close encounter between members of her family and actual Nazis. It must be uncomfortable sitting there listening to this stuff, trying everything you can to make sure that somebody else takes the blame, somebody else takes the heat. Everybody else has to take the blame but you. I don't know. She needs to answer for something here, because I think she knows more about this than she is saying, and so she should answer some questions here. What do you think?
Absolutely. And let me just extend this idea that Trudeau apologized. He didn't apologize and just blame it on Rhoda. That arrogant guy we call a PM, he blamed it on me. He blamed it on you. He blamed it on all the listeners. He said, on behalf of all Canadians, I want to apologize for having this person here. I did not invite a Nazi into the house. Don't you apologize for me, Mr. Trudeau. In fact, I put out a tweet this morning that I apologize to the world that we elected Trudeau. That's what I'm apologizing for, because he trivializes the Holocaust. And look, let's look at Chrystia Freeland a little bit closer. A lot of people have done a dive. Nothing official is being done on all this, but she has got a very questionable past, if you ask me. And I'm actually surprised to some degree that she has a security clearance to work in our government with some of the things she's been involved in when she went back over to the Ukraine, and she was accused of basically working there to stir up protests and a coup that was going on over there. I mean, that's what she was accused of. And when she was young herself, she praises all of this information about the Ukrainian resistance, if you will, which is the equivalent of the Nazism that pervades a good portion of the Ukraine. And I'm sorry to say that. I love the people of Ukraine, but I do not love Ukrainians who represent Nazism. And Freeland, her parents were, her mother was involved in it over there. It just goes on and on. She belonged to a group when she was young. They put her into what is the Ukrainian equivalent of the Hitler Youth Program. It's called the Ukrainian. They make it like the Boy Scouts, but the hero in those Boy Scouts is the Stephen Bandera, who's the Ukrainian leader, who she was caught holding a flag, a scarf of before, and walking around with it. He was the one who murdered Jews, Poles, innocent people everywhere. Those were the scouts that Christina belonged to, and she brags she put her children into it when they were born for doing it. So she is knee deep in this. And I think we really need an investigation, because she's the one in charge of sending over billions of our tax dollars Are my tax dollars, are your tax dollars supporting Nazis? Forget about giving them let's not forget about giving them a standing ovation. Are we funding Nazis now that are going to commit Nazi-like crimes over in the Ukraine? We're not getting the right questions asked. This is the most under-investigated government in the history of governments, as far as I can tell, Mark.
Yeah. And it's raised deeper questions about Canada's acceptance of so many Nazis after the Second World War. This tweet, Justin Trudeau deflects Pierre Poilievre's demand for a personal apology, which, to your point, we didn't get, after a Nazi was honored in the Commons, instead telling the Conservative leader he should apologize for the fact that 3 MPs met with Christine Anderson, a German member of the European Parliament, who the Prime Minister called far right. Let's listen.
The Prime Minister is responsible for state visits. Foreign heads of states come here. They expect that they will be protected not only against security threats, but against massive global scale embarrassments and shames like the one he allowed to unfold before Canadians. So, will the Prime Minister commit to personally calling President Zelensky and apologizing for his personal failure to vet those who were present and recognized on the floor of the House of Commons? Yes or no?
Well, I mean, if he should apologize to Zelensky, then he should certainly apologize to Canadians. Let's listen to his answer.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will note that to this day, the leader of the official opposition has not apologized for having had 3 MPs, including one of them who is still part of his leadership team, sit down to dine with a far-right German politician a number of months ago. No recognition, no apologies, no consequences for those 3 MPs who engaged with a far-right German politician.
Yeah, he's just ticked off because Christine Anderson ripped him a new a-hole in front of everybody in the European Parliament, and she did a fantastic job. I suspect Justin Trudeau has not forgotten that ripping. Let's listen to Christine Anderson's take on all this.
Well, what do you know? There was an event taking place in the House of Commons in Canada. Seriously, I had a hard time to just get over that. So what happened? Well, the House of Commons, they recognized a man who actually fought with the Nazis back in World War II. And they all got up and recognized him, applauded him, and praised him. And the Speaker of the House, as he announced him, he kind of looked a little funny and he stumbled, and I guess he must have realized in that moment who he was actually recognizing on the floor. So here I am thinking, whoa, what is going on? So let's go back a little. Here I was in Canada, and 3 members of Parliament in Canada, they were being crucified for having had lunch with me, a person who Justin Trudeau just stigmatized and labeled as being a Nazi. So they were crucified, they were asked to step down, there were talks about they need to be expelled from caucus, and all of this was going on. Why? Because they had lunch with me. And here we are, and they are all standing up, applauding and praising an actual Nazi. Well, Mr. Justin Trudeau, I hope you hold yourself to the very standard that you so generously apply to everyone else. I seriously think, and you know you do, you have to step down and resign. And so do all of the other congressmen that actually stood up and hailed and praised a literal and actual Nazi. Hold yourself to the same standard you would hold everyone else to, and I'm looking forward to your resignation. Thank you very much. Bye.
Ross McLean joining us on Saga 960 and this edition of the Mark Petronis Show. Ross, you heard from Christine Anderson. You also heard that exchange between Poilievre and Trudeau just prior to the break. To me, this must be pretty sweet for Christine Anderson to stand up and just rub Trudeau's face in it. I can imagine that's a pretty special moment for her.
Mark, there's something in me that says, yeah, this is funny. Yeah, this is something to laugh about. Yeah, this is hypocrisy. But I honestly think this was from the moment this happened, this was resignation territory. This guy was a Nazi. If we look into it all, we will find out that Trudeau knew exactly who he was, that Freeland knew exactly who he was. And by the way, for this error, this was the second time Trudeau was accused of meeting with a Nazi. He did a photo op when he went to Ukraine with one, a person completely supports doing the work of the Nazis and the Azov battalions. And it's not the first time that we were accused, Canada, while Trudeau was running the country, of having our military train the Nazi Azov troops. You can go look in the Ottawa Citizen. Our military said, "Oh my gosh, we can't let this get out. If people find out we've been training Nazis, what will this do to us?" But no, we trained Nazis. We sent more money over there to do it. So Mr. Trudeau has got a real Nazi problem. And I don't think it gets any worse than the atrocities that went on during the war. And I'll just point out that this particular battalion that this Mr. Hunka was a part of was convicted at the Nuremberg war crimes of murdering Canadian prisoners of war. They took them out. They were guarding them as prisoners. They took them out. They beat several of them to death, and they made the other ones kneel, and they shot them in the back of the head. That is fact.
Yeah.
And that is what we're talking about here. So I just hope that people, the mainstream media, Mark, does not do a good job of educating people about history and context. They instead want to give a narrative, change words a little bit, leave stuff out, don't give you all the details. But I think this is completely resignation territory. I can't think of anything much worse that can be done than what was happened here.
And yet he has no intention of resigning. It certainly looks that way. They had their late night meeting a couple of nights ago, and as far as I know, no discussion about Justin Trudeau stepping down. No, because everything is everybody else's fault. Nothing is ever his fault. No, of course not. And he continues with that tact. And so far, polls suggest that Canadians have had enough. But unfortunately, the frustration level is so high in Canada right now because they desperately want to change in government. And you've got Jagmeet Singh in there propping this guy up day in, day out, while at the same time criticizing him on X Twitter, attacking him for whatever policies, he thinks are wrong. Well, if you think they're that bad, then you should stop supporting his government, but he won't do that. It's so bizarre, and yet it's so unbelievably frustrating for so many Canadians right now. I don't remember this degree of frustration. It's been a long time, and people are just rallying against this guy. I just hope the polls continue to see the Liberals sink ever further, because I think it triggers these guys to no end, especially his hangers-on and supporters in the media, who I'm sure are getting nervous, more nervous by the day as they see Trudeau's numbers go into the low 20s. I'm not saying they're going to stay there. I'm sure they'll probably bounce back up a little bit. But I think this guy's rebrand as Mr. Tough Guy didn't work too well. And I started noticing it a couple of weeks back when he started shaking his fist at the grocers. And I can just imagine him getting the kind of advice that suggests, be tough, shake your fist to make people think that other people are to blame for what you did and that you're defending the interests of ordinary Canadians, which you are certainly not, Mr. Trudeau. But I think that there was a rebrand. I think as the polls started showing him losing more and more support, I think somebody said, yeah, just speak louder, start yelling more, attack the grocery store executives, shake your fist at India, pick a fight with the Indians over this allegation, which is, as far as I know, all it is. And I think it's all blown up in his face. I really do. None of it is working. And yet, the more they lose support, Ross, the angrier and meaner these guys get. And I don't know how bad it's going to get. How much worse is it going to get with these guys? Because I think they are more dangerous now than they have ever been. I really do. I firmly believe that. And the only hope for Canadians for an early election is if people in the caucus, whether it's Blackface's caucus or Jagmeet Singh's caucus, finally turn against their leaders and say, no, I can't support you anymore. I'm going to sit as an independent because you're full of it. And I just cannot support you another day. What do you think?
Well, let's take a look at Jagmeet Singh, who's supporting this government. You know, it's not reported much, but people can go back and look at it. Look how Jagmeet Singh won his riding the last time around. Justin Trudeau took out a very viable, strong Liberal candidate, had that person withdraw and put in a weaker one in a, let's see, how can I describe it? A fairly Asian dominant community in riding. And then somehow Jagmeet got back in. So he got back in so he could go get after his pension, his lifelong index pension that he wants. So I think he kind of owed Justin a favor right there, in my opinion. That's what it looks like to me. But let's talk about what he did now. He just called out India and accused Modi of murder, basically. He did that to whose support? To Jagmeet's support. Why Jagmeet support? Because Jagmeet supports the Khalistani terrorism. He's right behind it. And once again, I want to preface this with I work with a lot of Indian people. I help run a lot of Indian events. I know people. The people of India are good. I love them. I wish we had more immigrants from India become permanent residents and citizens here, but not Khalistani terrorists. And that's who Jagmeet is affiliated with. So what did he do? He threw an entire democracy, the largest democracy in the world, under the bus to help make Jagmeet look good for his people. Why is that? Oh, I guess so Jagmeet will keep him in power. It sure looks to me like there's a lot of backroom deals going on just so he can clench to power when he shouldn't be in power right now and he should be resigning right now. He is hanging on to power at all costs. All costs. And the costs fall to us, the Canadian people, Mark.
God help us. I mean, the price that Canadians are going to end up having to pay. I argued that maybe, given the lack of support that he now has in Canada, that he's going to have trouble pushing through his radical agenda, whether it's on the environment or whether it's on censorship or pushing this idea that the internet should be regulated and big tech companies should be paying and to prop up the media companies that he has been propping up with tax dollars up to this point, all this stuff. But I don't know entirely, because when you've got staunch support on the part of Jagmeet Singh and his ongoing gaslighting around arguing that he's doing a bad job. So, this is the bizarre thing about this. Even as he's talking about how bad a job that Justin Trudeau is doing, he continues to prop him up. And I'm just wondering, do people understand what awesome levels of gaslighting they're being subjected to by this guy, Singh? And for what? Just so that he can get his pension? I'm praying that members of the NDP finally grow a spine and say, I'm not going to support you anymore. We're done. I'm out of here. And people in the Liberal Party, MPs, that are seeing the poll numbers with the Libs down to 23%, saying, I'm going to get slaughtered here anyway. At least let me hold on to some level of dignity and step aside and say, I'm not going to support this guy. And if even one were to do that, it might prompt a stampede, in which case then you see the government dissolve. But until that happens, we're just stuck with these people. And to your point, God knows how much more damage that they're going to be able to do. They want to do structural damage to the country, Ross. This is just about different points of view or an ideological difference based on politics and the usual party differences. No, this is about having a government. For the first time, we have a government in Ottawa that is actually hostile to the existence of the country. And we saw that when he first got into power. He stepped forward and said, I told the New York Times, I want Canada to be the first post-nation state. Well, now we know what that means. We know that this guy, serving other people's interests, not the interests of Canadians, is taking a wrecking ball to Canada. And if he's got 2 more years with which to destroy this country, I'm not sure there's going to be anything left by the end of it. I really don't. These are scary times, my friend. I pray to God these people, Canadians, wake up. There are strong indications that they are, but what they have to do is put enormous pressure on their MPs, Liberal and NDP members of Parliament. If that's you, man, you need to put a lot of pressure on your member of Parliament and say, you know what? The government sucks. It doesn't work for us. It is not serving the interests of Canadians. They are destroying the country, and you need to back away from this. You need to step away from the policies because you look like a damn fool supporting this prime minister. So get the hell off that train and decide today that you're not going to be part of this destructive, rotten, toxic government another day. Just make that decision today. You know, have some courage, have some dignity, for crying out loud. Have you no self-respect whatsoever that you're going to sit there and vote with this clown time and time again? And when I say clown, I mean clowns, because you're talking about Jugmeat and Trudeau. Basically, 2 sides of the same coin, and they're wrecking the country. And so, you know, this is your role to play too. And by all means, ramp up the heat on these people, whether it's through protests. Boy, they sure hated those parental protests, didn't they? Yeah, when you saw these Antifa types and others rally and hold counter protests. I mean, as far as I know, they put hundreds of thousands, if not a million, people on the street. And that sends a message. You know how much the left hates that, Ross, because when they start squealing like stuck pigs and holding their own protests, you know that it hurts to see that many people on the street. So I say do it again. Next time, put 2 million on the street. Maybe that'll get the attention of the people in Ottawa. Whatever it takes, people need to stand up, just like they did in Peel Region at the school board when those monkeys voted in favor of this trans agenda. Anyway, I digress. Did you want to weigh in on any of that?
Yeah, you don't digress. And by the way, I'll just give you another metaphor for how this government is working. The people who came out to protest the parents for parental rights, of all
Yeah.
things, was CUPE, the Canadian Union of Public Employees.
Uh-huh.
They all work for Trudeau. They all work for Trudeau. And guess what they said? Well, we're going to send out some seasoned, really good protesters to deal with these parents. And what did we see? Antifa come out. Brown shirts. CUPE is acting as a metaphor for the brown shirts for this government to help shut down the people. But to your point, what democracy is supposed to be is your MP is supposed to represent you to the government. It's not that way anymore. You elect them, they go to the government, they go back and tell you what you have to swallow. They don't stand up. And I'll just say this part quickly. I watched when some of the MPs came out to defend Trudeau, and they read scripted lines about a Nazi in the House of Commons. And I said to myself, if you do not have the humanity and the stones to speak what you know you should be feeling as a person for what just happened and what that means to the country, and what you will do instead is read a script, you are not a representative. You do not have character. It reminds me of the open mic for the Ontario Science Council there, when they came on and said, I don't know, I just read what they tell me on these pieces of paper they give me. I don't know what we're saying today. Like, these people, good Lord. There is no Jimmy Stewart going to Washington, and I apologize for that old cultural reference there. But there's not too many people of character in this government right now. You're right. They should be resigning and stepping away on this. Except, guess what? They're all grifters. They couldn't get another job without getting a government job. They could never make that money. They could never get that pension. They're all grifters in it with them. One of the things the mob does when they bring you on side, even street gangs, is they get you to commit a crime with them. That's how they get the young ones in early. Hey, let's go rob a store. You rob a store, you come out, well, I guess I'm a gangster now, and I guess I'm in. I guess they can roll over on me. This is my clan. Well, the clan is a bunch of grifters that will not give up power. And I'm trying to remember the quote that Martin Luther King Jr. Said about, he says, they won't relinquish their power to us easily just because we ask for it. So the people will have to start making some calls to their local representatives and say what they feel. I'm really ashamed at this place where we're at in this point for Canada, a great country that is right now, it's circling the bowl as we're talking right now, the way it's being led. And that's my 2 cents, Mark.
Well, it's worth a lot more than 2 cents as far as I'm concerned. Ross, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people access your podcast?
Go to McLean Chronicles, McLean Chronicle on Twitter, McLean Chronicles podcast on YouTube. And I actually talk a lot about how to decipher all of the propaganda and the smears that are going on so that people can think for themselves. I mean, I'm glad to come on here and talk and try and say what I have learned with my analysis, but I really want people to learn for their own sake so that they can help protect their own futures and the futures of their children, Mark. Thanks for that.
Ross McLean. And that's it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Let's do it again soon, shall we? In the meantime, stay safe, be strong. Bye-bye for now.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the McLean Chronicles. Thanks for listening. Please follow me on Twitter at McLean Chronicle or on my YouTube channel, which I'm going to start beefing up, McLean Chronicles Podcast on YouTube. And let's keep an eye on this government. I don't think these problems are going away anytime soon. As I'm recording this, they've announced that they now want podcasts to register with the government so that they can keep an eye on their content. This is Ross McLean, out.